Hi, my name is Michael Aaron Ulmer. I'm a conceptual self-portrait photographer. And first up, this video is not going to be clean or polished. It's a very relaxed video. I don't plan on editing it very much at all. And I had a student reach out and they had some questions. And these questions were specifically about creative portraiture. And that excited me. That's something that I love. And I love that somebody, especially a student, is interested in that area. So they reached out with some questions. I have the questions here. I have a cup of tea. And I thought I would just go through, answer the questions on video, not just for this student, but also in this way, so anybody could have this information and it can be out there and exist and live forever, which is kind of frightening. But once again, very relaxed video. So let's dig in. The first question is, how could I improve my photography in my chosen area? And their chosen area is creative portraiture. I think the best way you can improve your photography across the board, no matter what your kind of subject of interest is by doing it. This is one of those answers to questions that nobody likes to hear, but I think the only way we get better at any of our chosen art mediums is by getting our hands dirty and doing it. You can study all day, and you can sit behind a computer and watch video after video on techniques and tips, but there are just things you cannot learn until you get in there and you start working. So my biggest piece of advice would be start working. And then, if you have an area that you are interested in, for you, it's creative portraiture, or for somebody else, if it's landscape photography, then don't do wedding photography. Don't put all your focus in an area that isn't what you want to end up doing. I see a lot of people do this where they're like, I really want to do some type of creative photography, but all they do is family photography, or all they do is wedding photography. And you can still do those things, and we still learn from those things. But if that's all you're doing, that's the only area, not only that you're going to grow in and learn more in, because we learn as we do, but also that's all you're going to have in your portfolio. And so when you want to do a certain type of work, if you don't have that work to show that you can do that, the opportunities aren't going to be there for you. And that may sound kind of harsh, but I do think as photographers, we can learn across the board, no matter what subject we're shooting. And I think we all should dabble in every subject, because I pull a lot of inspiration from my commercial shoots that I bring into my more artistic creative shoots. Technically, I bring a lot from my commercial shoots that I use in my artistic shoots. But if I only did commercial shoots, I wouldn't have the experience I had in creative photography. So I've been doing creative portraiture specifically and really honed in on it for the past 6 or 7 years. I've done it my whole life. I've dabbled in it, but I really honed in on it and made it my singular focus. And I learned so much just by doing it. So if creative portraiture is something that you're interested in, then you need to get out there and do it. And that's how you're going to improve. You will learn so much when you're on shoots. You'll learn so much about edits. And my biggest advice is fail. 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 Step into shoots where you're doing things that you have no business doing. Step into shoots where you're going above and beyond the skills you have at the current moment. And you will fail. And that's exactly what you need. I've learned more from my failed shoots than I learned from my successful shoots. And my biggest recommendation is don't be afraid to fail. And then when you do fail, you have to look at it as a sign, and it stings. It always stings when you fail. I'm not going to act like when I get off a shoot and it doesn't go right, or when I look at it that I'm just like, that's fantastic. Yay, I learned. No, I'm angry, I'm mad, I'm upset. It makes me want to quit. But knowing that when you fail, you can have all those emotions. You can be angry, you can be mad, you can want to quit. But then knowing that it's like, okay, I'm so proud of myself that I got out there, I did it, and I failed. Because that's what we should be striving for, is to push ourselves. And if you want to learn, you're gonna fail. So be okay with that. And I think if we step into shoots being like, this may not work out, and that's okay. I think that gives us kind of the right frame of mind. But once again, if you want to improve in creative portraiture, do creative portraiture. It's such a dumb answer, but it's the truth. How many images should there be in a portfolio? This is, I'm not going to give a specific number because I don't think there should be. I honestly don't think. I think we as artists should be more focused on what shouldn't be in our portfolio. And the things that shouldn't be in our portfolio are things that aren't our A+ best work. I think sometimes the hardest part about getting a portfolio together is the trimming down and the editing. I'm on the fence of you should have less things in your portfolio if some of your work doesn't represent your work in the best light. So, not only presenting your best work, and if anything is kind of on the fence, and we're not always to be trusted. Some of my work I really hate, and there's just something about it that sits off with me. But for other people, they see something in it. So I think definitely getting opinions about it. But another thing is, if you have an area that you really want to dive into, for example, and I wouldn't tell this to everybody, but you're very interested in creative portraiture. Once again, if your portfolio is only filled with sports photography, that doesn't tell me that you want to pursue creative portraiture. That doesn't let me know that you are capable of handling creative portraiture. So whatever direction you want to head in, your portfolio should represent that. And here's another controversial take. If your current portfolio doesn't represent that, you haven't had that work, then get out there and create that work. That's what I did. There were areas that I wanted to work in. There were things that I wanted to do, and I didn't have a way to prove myself that I could. So I just went out there and did it myself. It doesn't have to be, I do everything self-portrait, so I keep everything, I just do everything by myself. But you can do it by yourself. You can gather a friend or two and do work specifically that shows off the area, the direction you want to head in. But in terms of number, I would say just focus on making sure it's your best foot forward and it's only your best work. If there's something you're on the fence about or you feel like you're not 100% proud of, don't put it in there. I think when it comes to portfolios, less is more, and it should be A+ across the board. How would you consider a portfolio to be presented? How would you consider a portfolio to be presented for my chosen genre? Presented. I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying of just making sure that if your genre is creative portraiture, I better open up a portfolio and see creative portraiture. And especially, it's so tricky when you choose a genre where already an expectation is being set. So for example, if you hand me a black book and say, here's this person's creative portraiture portfolio, you've put a big expectation on me opening up that page. Because when I open that page, I better see something creative. And already there's this expectation being built. So I would say, you better be bringing your creative A game. Because if I open it up and I see things that aren't creative, or I see things that I've seen before, things that are kind of, I guess we'll call it mid, I'm going to be judging it more harshly than if you just said, here's a photographer's portfolio. And then I wouldn't be stepping in with that expectation. So I would say when you present it, think about how you're presenting it. Think about the words you're using to present yourself. Because everything you say sets an expectation. And if you don't meet that expectation, there may be disappointment. Just based on the words we used, when otherwise, if we wouldn't have used those words, they would have been fine. But I would say, if your chosen area is creative portraiture, I'm really struggling saying the word portraiture today, which is making this difficult. But if that's your chosen subject, then I would say I wouldn't worry so much about how you present your portfolio. If that's what you're doing, then you plan, I'm hoping you plan on developing a style that's all your own. Because to me, creative portraiture is more about the artist creating their vision than about making something that appeals to people. So I would say your portfolio should be uniquely you. And that means when you make it and present it, you can make it and present it however you choose. There are no rules. People always try and pin us down into this corner of like we should present it, we should do it a certain way. But I think there are no rules. And we should be able to do and present our work however we please. And here's the thing. If it's good, it will speak. If it's good, it will speak. However you present it. Even if it's not done correctly, how it's quote unquote supposed to be done, if your work is good, it will speak. And the hardest part is just getting it in the right hands of people, but that's a conversation for another day. What has been your favorite project to work on so far? My favorite. Let me take a sip on that. It's interesting. So the way I do it is I do a monthly self-portrait, and I do one single self-portrait, creative portrait every single month. That's conceptual. A lot of my favorite ones are the ones where I'm really just getting an emotion or a feeling out of myself. I'm not really caring about how it looks. I'm not caring about like how it's being presented. I'm making it solely just for me. And for me, the one that comes to mind, and I don't know why, it's my portrait. Oh geez, I'm forgetting the name of it. I think it's called Invisible Man. No, it's called People Pleaser. Whew. Is People Pleaser. I made this one, and I think it was my favorite because I'm referencing the film Invisible Man, which is something that's special to me because it's a movie. It's one of my favorite movies that I watched as a child. And Invisible Man 2 stars Vincent Price, who is my favorite actor of all time. And like old film, especially classic horror film, has influenced my work a lot. But so when I made it, I was making these kind of references that made me happy. But also, I was kind of getting these emotions, feelings out. And even when I made it, I was like, I know people aren't going to get this one or really like this one, but I'm having fun and I'm enjoying myself. And so I'll say that one. If you asked me in 20 minutes, I would probably say something different. But right now in this moment, I'm really thinking on that one fondly. And it's funny because it's not a very popular piece of mine. It didn't do well. It didn't get a lot of attention. And it didn't bother me because like it was such a fun thing to do. Also, I think I'm proud of it and I enjoy it because I did the technique that I really love that is very challenging. And that's doing composite work with different shutter speed pictures. So I took the initial picture of my main subject at a fairly normal shutter speed. I think it may have been like 1/200th. Just something to get nice, clean, crisp. And then I took all my separate subjects. I slowed my shutter down, got all my exposure, put it in the filter on. Excuse me. And then I took all those pictures and blended them together. And it's really challenging to switch up all your settings mid-shoot. And then in Photoshop, when you composite multi-shutter pictures together, it's a big challenge. And so I like that challenge, and that's a technique that I really like to use. So I'm going to go with that one. What are your considerations you think about before you light the scene? I consider everything. Lighting is the most important thing in photography. If you really think about it, without light, there is no photo. So one thing I always tell, especially young photographers, if I could go back, I would invest less money into my camera system and more into my lighting. Well, I'm really struggling to find the words today. equipment, wow, and my lighting skills. And more so heavy on the skills part because I've seen people light things beautifully with very minimal equipment because they just understand light. But when I first start, I do a sketch of my piece, which is something that's important to me, and I start to consider where and how I want the light to fall. For me, a big consideration of lighting, if I'm shooting outdoors, of course, I have to face the direction of the sun, and that alters my image because I can only face a certain way. So that changes things. But when I'm lighting something, a big thing I think about is my background and my back subject. Because if I'm going to have a really muddy background, like for example, if it's just going to be trees back there, that can get really muddy. So I have to start thinking about, okay, I need to add some light behind me to create a little separation. Like we have right here, this little backlight. It's just creating separation from our background. And then a big thing you have to think about is how you're lighting your person, your subject, and also what they're wearing. This is something that is huge in what I do. I shoot a lot against either like light blue sky or like dark trees, grass. And if you put somebody in a dark shirt and have a dark background, there's no separation. So most of the time I light and dress my subjects dependent on what we're going to shoot in the background. But also a good thing to think about, especially in creative portraiture, oftentimes I have things in my, like props. For example, in one, I held a candle. That emits light. And when you do composite work, sometimes you can forget that something that you're holding is going to emit light, and you need to craft the story. If you're doing creative portraiture, you're telling a story. So if you're holding a singular candle, then that your light needs to be coming from that and lighting your subject accordingly. If you're holding a candle here and you have a big bright light coming from here, you're not continuing the story you're telling. You're telling like a different story. You're creating the illusion of like another window here. But if you bring all your light from here, you're saying this is the only source of light in the room. So I think that's the things you have to think about when you're doing creative portraiture is if you're bringing in subjects, how do those subjects either affect the light or sometimes present the light? For that candle, I had to do a really soft lighting setup and make it nice and warm to make it look like all my light was coming just from that candle in this direction. I just recently did a piece where this whole side of my face is on fire. And I had to light that as if not only the flames were like engulfing me, but that all the flame would be emitting warm flame light around. So I had to light the scene like I was on fire, even though I added the fire in post. So it's just little things like that. I think the more you think about the story you're trying to tell, and making sure your lighting is accompanying that story and helping tell it, versus sometimes I see some pieces where their lighting is actually working against them in the story that they're telling. So, and then with everything, lighting creates shadows, and making sure your shadows are perfect and on point. That's a huge thing in creative portraiture. If there is, what resources do you recommend? I feel like I'm the worst person to ask this. So all of my photography, I've been self-taught. I've never learned photography or video. I took a few graphic design classes in college, but it was mostly just kind of relearning things, like refreshing things that I had already learned. But I've learned most everything via YouTube and like random tutorials. But that's also, I learned the best from that way. So I think the best, like, the way to utilize the resources of the internet, because sometimes it's so vast and there's so much you don't know where to start, is pick a specific project where you want to do something very specifically. Whether that's like create a realistic motion blur. and then choose a project that you're going to do that, and then find a tutorial that helps you do that, and then do it in an actual project. And then keep doing that where you kind of further your skills in very specific ways. I think sometimes we get it wrong and we try and just learn, for example, Photoshop or something, or like even lighting techniques, just big and broadly. And I think it's hard to get that information to sink in. So I think the best things we can do is kind of apply that information to very specific areas, and then that helps it kind of get into our system and remember. And then we end up doing it again and we can refresh and remember. But resources, I don't know. If I'm being completely honest, I don't know. I'm not the person that seeks out other photography in references. I know some people like that. I've just never been inspired in that way. So yeah, sorry. I'm not the best person to ask on that. How do you plan and visualize bigger shoots? I do it poorly. No. The big thing is like making a detailed plan. So, for example, I always start with a sketch, and that will let you, like, as you look at your sketch, you'll start to see the problems it creates. You start to realize how you're going to light it. If you have multiple subjects, how they're going to interact. If they're going to interact, what kind of shadows you'll need to add. And then sometimes, this goes back to the way we light things. I'll light things specifically. For example, if I have two characters interacting with each other, I won't light it in a way that creates really challenging shadows for me to have to work. I'll light it in the way that creates the easiest shadows for me to be able to create. So that's also something to think about. But I think a big thing is sketching, and then based on that sketch, planning. So I'll sketch it out, and then I start gathering all my materials. And then when I'm out there on an actual bigger shoot, sometimes, like, this is so important. I use light stands. I have them all around me. To put in position where I'm going to be standing, and that helps me visualize height so I can work on composition, but also just like where I'm going to be at. And then I use string on the ground. I make all these markers and things like that, and just so I can sit there and look, and even though some of the elements aren't in place, I can see the bigger picture. But I think the best way to plan big shoots is to sketch out your idea and then just go through everything. Every prop you would ever need, everything, like where the light should be hitting, and then practice. I do test shoots all the time. And they never see the light of day. I will do a test shoot, just get out there and roughly, and it lets me see immediately if you have an idea that you're not sure if it's going to work, go do a test shoot. Some people consider it a waste of time. I think it's the best use of your time. I test shoot all the time just to see if lighting is going to work, to see if weird ideas. When you're doing creative portraiture, you're going to have ideas that don't work, and you won't know if they don't work until you get out there and try it. So get out there and try it. The best way to figure out if something's going to work is go test it out. And then sometimes if you have a really big shoot, you need to test out, like you have a lot going on, just test out a few things at once. You don't have to do it all at once. But I would say my biggest thing is, like, don't be afraid to put the work in. I think sometimes as artists, we're kind of like lied to in the sense of that, like, art should just be this kind of like very free flowing process, but it's not. It's work. And if you think of it that way, if you think of it as work, as like, okay, I got to get out there, I have to execute this, I have to do this, and I have to do this. For me, it makes it a lot easier. And that, like, I see artists who throw things together and it doesn't quite come out how they want it to. And then I see when an artist has a really clean, everything is executed, I know they put in the time and they put in the work. It makes a difference. If you really want to go to the next level, don't be afraid of work. In fact, embrace it and just accept the fact that it's not going to be easy. And, like, good things don't just happen overnight. It takes a good plan. And if you work with other people, I personally don't. I do everything by myself. But if you do work with other people, rely on them. They're bringing their own resources. They're bringing their own kind of like ideas and visual library. And always make sure if you're working with other people that it's a collaboration. Everybody can bring something to the table. Everybody has an idea. Sometimes you have to work harder to like keep everything focused and on track. But that's why in my commercial work, when I do work with other people, I step into the shoot with a full plan. There's nothing that is being decided on the day. And so everybody knows, and everybody's been a part of the planning process. So everybody has given their input, everybody knows. And I think that's the key. When you step to actually execute the shoot, you should have a very detailed plan on how you're going to do it. Especially in creative portraiture, because I feel like you need a clean, specific vision and you need a plan to execute that vision. Now, things happen on shoots that go wrong all the time, and you have to be ready to pivot and roll and kind of change it up on the dime. But yeah, for the most part, if you have a great plan and you've kind of thought through all the problems that could happen, you're setting yourself up for success. That is all the questions. I'm just really excited that someone's interested specifically in creative portraiture because it's something I love to look at. So I'm excited that there are other artists that are going to be like creating and doing that. But I would say specifically, if you're stepping into creative portraiture, like I said at the beginning, and I don't want this to sound harsh, but like you're setting the bar high for yourself by calling it creative portraiture. So like work hard to make sure your work is innovative and creative. And don't call it creative portraiture and it's just like a headshot of somebody like holding a flower over one eye. Sorry. like if it's going to be creative, like creativity infers newness. It infers like ingenuity. It infers excitement. It infers something that I haven't seen before. So don't disappoint. I hope that doesn't sound too harsh, but I think I've seen too many people kind of shoot themselves in the foot because they present this that like I do this one thing, and it's like, well, if you just called that portraiture, I wouldn't be thinking of it in that way, and I wouldn't be looking at it with such a critical eye. But I think that's exciting. I think it's exciting to like to challenge yourself in that way. So yeah. My last thing I'm going to add in here is create. If you really are passionate and interested about creative portraiture, like I am, one of the most important things I do, I live my life in a way that promotes creativity. My number one goal is to live a life that creative thought, creative exercise is number one in my life. And that kind of goes with everything I do. Creativity is at the top of the list. So a big thing is like have other areas in your life that you get to get some enjoyment and sense of purpose out of. Because I think if we pour our entire selves just into our art, it can get a bit toxic. We can start to put our worth and our value in our work. And then sometimes that makes us not want to take creative risks. But if we have all these other areas in our life where we can also pour ourselves out into, then it gives us a chance to really have fun and like create things and take risks. So that's the biggest thing. If you're going to work in any creative field, you have to be willing to, and ready to take risks, which is scary. It's frightening, and I'm not going to lie to you and act like it isn't. But it does get easier. Once you get used to it, and once you start to learn and trust and know yourself, and trust your skills, it just becomes fun. Then you actually start to get to play, and then you actually start to get to create the things the ideas that you have in your head. Because that's the thing. If you're anything like me, you have ideas in your head that you want brought to life, but you just don't have the skills yet to make them perfect. If you just keep working toward that, you will. And it's very empowering and it's very exciting. So I wish you all the best. Hopefully this helps you out. Sorry it was so rambly, but it just excites me that young people are excited about creative portraiture.